Does anyone know for sure that they are driving down, if you have room in your car or anything? Or if there's people that want to go, but I know some people want to go but don't want to drive. So afterwards, we'll have time to hang out a little bit after Rachel's presentation if you need to connect with someone about that. Okay, I'm going to introduce Rachel. You may have heard us flitzing around the room a bit ago with our technical difficulties. So Sandy's friend Scott is saving the day by driving to his house and getting the exact right chord because the 300 other chords we had here didn't work right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce her, and she'll do some things just talking, and then when he gets here, we'll actually have the projector up going. So Rachel has a bachelor's degree in psychology and political science from Ohio State, and she has a master's degree in political communication from American University. She has a lot of street cred, so to speak. She's the former comms director for various state, senate, and government campaigns. She used to be the press secretary for the ODP. She's worked for ACLU of Ohio and Innovation Ohio most recently. She's the co-founder of How Things Work at the Ohio State House. How many of you already followed that on social media? Look, you're fans. All right. And if you don't know what that is, after today you will, and you will also be a fan. And she is most recently starting an LLC called State Action Initiative. I'll let her tell you more about that. But anyway, Rachel.
So basically, I'm just going to walk through the presentation so that when Scott, our hero, gets here, we can just dive right in. And don't worry, the first few slides are very boring. And so my name is Rachel Coyle. I have been doing these types of trainings for almost 7 years now. And it started out as a hobby. My coworker and I, who worked in the Senate at the time, wondered if maybe there should be more public attention paid to the State House and if we could get some more folks paying attention to the State House. And we literally put a Facebook event up. We rented some space next to a bar in Columbus, and we said, come learn about the State House. And within 2 days, 1,000 people had signed up, which was about 950 more people than the room today. So we realized that we needed to make this a regular thing. We turned it into a training, and we've been going all over the state. We actually, during COVID, turned it into a virtual presentation, so I've got lots of PowerPoint versions of it now. And recently, I made an interesting decision to turn this into my full-time job. So I left Innovation Ohio and founded an LLC called State Action Initiative, and now have a bunch of different types of trainings like the budget one we're doing here today. And I'm contracting with organizations to help them with their state level advocacy in various ways. I told my parents, basically, I will do this until I run out of money, and then I'll get a real job. So if you are interested, there will be a way later if you're interested in donating to help pay rent. That would be nice. But so what we're going to learn about today is it's the budget presentation. And I have a few opening comments and slides that are just about the very basics of the State House so you understand the dynamics that are going on there. But also I'm going to talk through some resources as well that I will send you all afterwards. So if the lovely hosts here don't have your email address, make sure that they get that so that I can send you what is just a large resources email afterwards, so you don't have to worry about writing anything down during this presentation or memorizing it. And also don't worry if you don't know anything about the budget yet, because very few people do. It's an incredibly complicated subject. And I also know that there are lots of people in this room who are, like they said, librarians and people who are very subject matter experts in different aspects of the state. So if you have a question that I don't know the answer to about a specific line in the budget, I will find it and I will email it to you. I learn things every time we do this, which is great. Another thing I always like to start with is saying that you have incredible amounts of power at the state level. Sometimes these presentations get a little depressing just because of the dynamics at the State House. Sometimes it can feel like calling and emailing and marching doesn't have an impact on what is a supermajority of one party. But that is not the case. They are not sure how to handle people because it's so recent that they until very, very recently, they didn't have anyone contacting them. When I worked at the State House, we used to literally go hours in between a single constituent phone call. It's unbelievable. If everyone in this room picked a legislator and called them on the same day, they would think the whole state was calling. They would freak out.
It is unbelievable how few people it takes to make a very big impact at the State House. But it also means that if you don't contact the State House and a few other people do who disagree with you, they're going to get their way a lot of the time. The example I give is during COVID. A lot of folks in this room were staying home and masking up and listening to Dr. Acton and Governor DeWine as they told us to stay home. And about 75 people decided to go to the State House and protest mask mandates and regulations, and they were the only ones there. So the news showed up, it got coverage all over the state. People started talking about this very small group of protesters, and it started to feel like maybe everyone in the state doesn't support mask mandates. Maybe I'm the only one staying home. And it really created this feeling that was not, I don't believe, accurate at the time, that folks didn't support Dr. Acton and Governor DeWine. And so then we had what turned into legislation to oppose mask mandates and regulations for COVID, and everything spiraled from there. And it really is that just a few people make a big difference. So keep that in mind if you get depressed during this presentation, because you might. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a couple State House basics, and then I'll talk to you about why the budget matters, because the budget can sound like a very dry topic. It sounds like we're just going to talk through line items for funding, but you really need to understand what it means for human beings. And then I'll talk through the budget itself, the process, where we are in the budget process, and then I'll give you some resources, and then we'll do Q&A. So the first thing you need to know is a term that I'm going to say a lot, which is supermajority. So Ohio has a supermajority of one party, the Republican Party, that controls the state. And I say this I don't care which political party you connect with, I say this in every room I go to, supermajorities are bad for democracy. They mean that one party gets to control the state without essentially any checks or balances at all on their power. So if Governor DeWine, who is a Republican, decides to be more moderate on something and veto a bill, the legislature has enough Republicans in the House and the Senate that they can override that veto and force a bill into law all by themselves. There really is just an unbelievable amount of power at the state level controlled by one party that has taken away what we think of as the democratic process. And actually right now the Democrats are in historic lows in the state legislature for their numbers. So that is a dynamic you need to know as we go through the budget process. Just keep it in mind, especially if you're going to testify. Another dynamic you need to know is between the House and the Senate. So the leaders are both Republicans, obviously. Matt Huffman is the Senate president, and Jason Stephens is the Speaker of the House. They are very different types of people. They have very different priorities. Matt Huffman is very focused on getting universal vouchers passed. School vouchers is his thing. He really wants that. He is not a fan of public schools. He has said previously he wants to essentially get rid of them and replace them with private schools. Jason Stephens, on the other hand, is fascinating for many reasons, the main one being that he was not supposed to be the Speaker of the House. So last December, the Republicans in the House elected Derek Merrin to be their Speaker. Derek Merrin is very far to the right, he's Trump and DeSantis aligned and talks that way very publicly. And the Democrats during the Christmas break actually worked behind the scenes with some more moderate Republicans in the House to get enough votes to elect a slightly more moderate Republican to be Speaker of the House, Jason Stephens. And that has created just a fascinating experience for all of us on every issue, because there are now, what we have is essentially a caucus of Republicans under Derek Merrin who believe that he is the rightful Speaker of the House and that Jason Stephens is not. Sounds familiar at the federal level as well. And so they have caused so much trouble that they took extra weeks to elect, to just pass basic rules for governing themselves in the House, because they are fighting every step of the way to make it look like Jason Stephens has as little power as possible. So there's a lot of bills that we thought were going to move that haven't because of this internal Republican fighting, and the budget looks very different than we thought it would because of that as well. So we'll talk, the only pictures you're missing right now are their faces, which I can send you if you're interested. So I want to talk now about how important the budget is. I'll talk through a couple of major issues that are always fought through in the budget, and then a couple specific fights that are happening this year. And then we'll talk you through, Scott, our hero, is here. Yay! And then I'll show you some the process itself. So Ohio, every 2 years, Ohio passes a budget to fund or not fund pretty much every major program in the state for the next 2 years. All right, so Scott is a hero. The budget passes every 2 years. That's where we were. And now we're going to talk through why it is so important. And there are literally any issue that you care about at all, if it has any money connected to it at all, the budget covers it. And so you have to pay attention to those reasons. School funding is huge every time, and especially right now. Anything having to do with the poverty rate in Ohio, school lunches is a big fight we're having right now. Local governments, colleges and universities might be a major fight this year. And infrastructure, water quality, we actually are also concerned about, and this happens a lot of times, we are concerned that there will be some, quote, culture war issues thrown in. Sometimes we see abortion bans thrown into the budget. Some of the concerns this year are about anti-trans issues and DEI education type issues. So we're always watching for those as well. The big one, okay, so we're going to talk through a couple big ones for reasons why you need to care about the budget. Number one is school funding reform. So many decades ago now, so 1997, the state Supreme Court ruled that Ohio's education system, K-12 education system, is unconstitutional. And they ruled that several times after that, and no one did anything about it. And the problem is that the system relied too much on property taxes. So basically, poor neighborhoods would equal poor schools. And the rich neighborhoods would pass levies and support their schools, and that gap would increase. In 2021, thanks to fighting from a lot of Ohioans, they passed a bipartisan fair school funding plan that's going to take 3 different budget cycles to actually fully implement that is supposed to help decrease this problem and was very exciting. We were hoping that they would make it permanent law immediately, but instead they made it temporary law. So now again, this year, we are having a battle to keep the Fair School Funding Plan in the budget, and there have been attempts to take it out. So one of the things that a lot of our How Things Work activists are pushing for is to keep the Fair School Funding Plan in the budget, and the House has decided to do that. So the budget coming out of the House and going to the Senate includes this implementation of the plan to make our school system, education system constitutional. Now the problem is going to be whether or not the Senate tries to take it out. Another thing we are always on the lookout for in Ohio is we have a significantly high infant mortality rate in our state. We are 42nd in the nation in infant mortality. That's actually better than it used to be. And there are lots of ways that we could be assisting with keeping babies and mothers alive in our state. And all of those things involve money, of course. We could be funding prenatal health care services. We could be funding jobs and family services, child and family services. One of the big issues this year is whether or not Medicaid should cover doulas, which is very important, especially for communities of color who tend to use doulas. And if they're not covered under Medicaid and not regulated under the state, often you end up with someone who is not licensed to be a doula. So that can be something that would actually save a lot of lives in different communities throughout Ohio. So that is going to be that is also in the House budget, and we are hopeful that that will stay through the Senate budget as well. Again, with the budget being so connected to children and child poverty, Ohio has a very high child poverty rate and child food insecurity rate. About 19-20% of children in Ohio, so that's about 1 in 5, suffer from food insecurity, where they don't know where their next meal is coming from all the time and are considered to be living in poverty. So there are several things in the budget that would assist in decreasing the child poverty rate in Ohio. These are currently in the House version of the budget that just passed through to the Senate, and the goal would be to keep them in there. So we have a lot of funding for food insecurity, including a lot of additional funding to the Children's Hunger Alliance and the Association of Food Banks. There is also a provision that right now we have children can receive free and reduced lunches if they qualify, and it would get rid of the reduced. So any child who qualifies for any food assistance for school meals would get those meals for free. That was a compromise. The Democrats were hoping to give all students school lunches for free, and the majority decided to go with this plan, which is still a significant increase. Doulas, like we mentioned, Medicaid coverage for pregnant women and children under the age of 19 up to 300% of the poverty line, which would help a lot with that child poverty issue, and cover children under Medicaid from birth through 3 years of age, no matter who they are. There's also several pay increases in the budget right now, base teacher pay and direct service care provider pay. And then ARPA funding, so that some of that federal funding from the American Rescue Plan, putting it to good work for water and sewer and broadband. So there are lots of things in the budget that Democrats and Republicans agree on in the House. And the problem is going to be whether or not the Republicans in the House or in the Senate feel that those should stay. So here are some controversial pieces of the budget that you will hear people battling over in the news over the next couple of weeks and months. One is that the House budget slashed a lot of money that was supposed to be going towards lead poisoning prevention and testing. So there will be some pushes in the Senate to put some of that funding back. Like we mentioned, Matt Huffman, the Senate president, is a very, very loud and strong proponent of vouchers, universal vouchers. And so the House budget expanded vouchers significantly, and it'll be interesting to see if President Huffman wants to expand those even more. The source of funding is also a concern, whether or not the voucher money comes from the public school budget or if they find something else to fund it with. Another issue that we are watching very closely, there is a bill that's about colleges and universities that you may have seen if you follow Honesty for Ohio Education or either of the Ohio education unions or the AAUP this is their #1 priority bill this year to fight. They actually showed up at the State House in numbers I have never seen since SB 5. Last week, there were 500 people that submitted testimony against this bill, SB 83, last week. They call it the Higher Education Destruction Act. It would ban entire departments and classes and majors and anything that lifts up an individual group of people. So think African American studies, women's studies, gender studies, anything connected to those at all, including dorms, scholarships. Some of our lawyers tell us that it would actually impact sports, single-sex sports. So this bill is very broad. It also would ban academic partnerships with China, so Chinese exchange students, which are a significant economic benefit to the state. And it would ban public workers from striking. So this bill is not currently in the budget, but there are a lot of rumors that this bill is going to end up as an amendment to the budget in the Senate. So all the fighting that has been happening to oppose this bill publicly, it would be harder to do that if it becomes a piece of a larger bill, because it's harder to focus on one thing. So we are watching very closely for that in the next couple of weeks. We are also always watching for those culture war pieces like anti-trans language and abortion bans, that kind of thing, to show up in the budget, just because it's thousands of pages long and sometimes they sneak things in. Another piece, obviously, that is controversial is how the budget does taxes, essentially. Who benefits from tax cuts, who gets tax breaks in what capacity. So HB 1, this was originally what was going to go into the budget. It was very concerning for a lot of the tax advocacy organizations. It would essentially create a flat tax and pay for it by gutting funding over $1 billion a year to libraries, parks, schools, and local governments. And there were a lot of people, including mayors of very conservative towns, who were like, that is not acceptable to me. So this has been getting a lot of really negative press from both sides. It's a lot of people opposing it. And so what we are seeing now is they have shifted from this plan to a plan that would create a flat tax for just the lower 2 tax brackets, which is significantly less controversial, but still very controversial. So what the budget would now do is it would consolidate the 2 lowest tax brackets. And the conservatives are angry about this because they say it's not fair. It only helps lower income and it doesn't do enough for higher income folks. The progressive groups are mad because they say that it doesn't help lower income folks enough. They say some people who make under $60,000 would only see like literally a $2 or $3 change in their taxes. So both sides are unhappy with this, which is, you know, if you're compromising, both sides are going to be a little bit unhappy. So this is definitely much more of a compromise than HB1 would have been. And it's significantly better for if you're thinking in terms of local governments and mayors and that sort of thing. So this is what we're looking at. We're going to see where this ends up in the Senate version, but the House version right now is doing this, where it lowers or it consolidates the two lowest tax brackets. This is another thing. This is just a side rant that I like to give. This should be one of the #1 things that we fight about as a state during the budget process. And this year we aren't, which makes me very sad. There is a massive tax loophole in Ohio law. We call it the LLC loophole. Actually, so there's different names for it. Democrats call it the LLC loophole, and Republicans call it the small business income tax cut. So there are lots of ways to call it. Its goal is to help small businesses grow and hire more people and to create more jobs. But it was written very loosely. So it actually ends up helping people like anyone who has an LLC, so a lawyer, for example. I've actually given this presentation several times and had lawyers come up to me afterwards and whisper, I pay less in taxes than my secretary and I feel really bad about it. And it's because of this. And we also have lots of data showing that the loophole has not created jobs because it doesn't give you enough back in taxes to actually hire a new person. It just gives you more money. And it also costs taxpayers over $1 billion a year, which we could be spending on other things. So my goal would be, as an LLC myself, I don't think we should get rid of it entirely. But I do think that it should go towards small businesses. There is a way to tighten it that would save taxpayers literally hundreds of millions of dollars a year and only go towards actual small businesses that have the capacity to hire another human being. There are ways that we could figure that out to tighten that. That is entirely a side rant because they've decided not to deal with the LLC loophole this year. Some year they should. And these are some articles from the past couple of years just talking about how incredibly difficult it is to argue in favor of the small business tax cut. Okay, so now that you have a deep passion for the budget and where Ohio's money goes, and you've got a lot of things that you're angry about and where the money is currently going, we're going to talk through the process. So a term I might mention several times is fiscal year. So the fiscal year is different than the calendar year. Ohio's goes from July 1st to June 30th of the following year. And it's termed by the year it ends in. So we are currently in fiscal year 2023, but fiscal year 2024 starts on July 1st. That's why the budget has to be passed by June 30th at midnight. And that's why things are going to really heat up in the State House over the next couple of months. And then it'll be in place for 2 fiscal years. You also need to know that Ohio's Constitution requires a balanced budget. So we cannot be just creating budget holes and not filling them, which is why you'll see a lot of fighting over things like the voucher program, which they know would cost significant funding, and we have to find a way to pay for it immediately up front. So this is a side note just so that you are aware, there are several bills connected to the budget. We are only going to be talking about the operating budget in this presentation. But they are also going to pass they already did, pass a transportation budget and a workers' compensation budget. But the operating budget funds every other major program in the state. So it's the big one that gets most of the news coverage and interest. There are also 2 other bills connected to the budget that will be passed next year. The capital budget is fun. You get to give little bits of funding to local community projects and public improvement projects, and you get like small community theaters asking for some money. It's nice. And then the legislators get to go home and give that funding out to their local communities. So if you know someone who fits into this category that has never applied for capital budget funding, they should do that soon. Contact their state legislator and ask if they qualify, if they're a charitable project, an art project, local government, they could get funding from the state next year. And a lot of people don't know they have that opportunity. But we are talking about the operating budget. That's the big one that funds most of the state. We're also talking, there's several different funding sources that are connected to the operating budget, but we're going to focus on, again, the main one. So the main budget bill and the main fund, which is the General Revenue Fund. It's the largest state fund. All major state agencies receive money through it. Some of the money in the GRF, General Revenue Fund, comes from federal sources. So Medicaid grants are big. TANF, we've also got some of the American Rescue Plan money this year. But a large portion of that money comes from state sources. And if you pull out the federal money and just look at the state sources, you can see that most of other states' income comes from sales tax and income tax. And this is another place where the Democrats and the Republicans disagree, where priorities disagree, because there are folks who feel that sales tax being the main source of our funding hurts poor Ohioans, because we all have to buy products, but poor Ohioans end up paying a larger percentage of their income to buy those same products. So there are people who feel that we should be moving more towards income tax, where you're taxed more if you make more. That is, again, a fight over priorities. And you can see that Ohio in the last several years has moved more towards taking its money from sales tax rather than income tax, which groups like Policy Matters Ohio are very angry about, because they argue that it harms the poor more each year. And this is just, again, a side reference that you should know about. We're talking mostly about the General Revenue Fund today, but the local government fund is also a big source of controversy most years. They unfortunately have decided not to deal with it again this year. But back in 2011, Governor Kasich and the legislature drained the local government fund, which used to spend a lot of money helping local communities exist. It would pay for, potholes, and it would pay for projects and the local first responders, police and fire, parks, and they drained all of that and they used it to plug other state budget holes. And they have not restored the funding in the local government fund. So the local government fund is now incredibly small, which means that you end up with local communities having to do things like pass a ton of levies, or they put police out on the streets with a quota for tickets because they have to make money for the city, or you get slower police and fire response times. And all of these things are things that we should be caring about, but it's become the norm, because this has been going on since 2011, that we haven't had this money in the local government fund. And again, this year, this does not seem to be a budget priority. So we can call this also a side Rachel rant slide. So we are talking mostly about the operating budget and the General Revenue Fund, the GRF. And now I'm going to talk you through the process, and I'll show you where we are in the process. So step one is the governor gets to give you his dream budget. That happened, I believe it was the end of January. Yes. And he will come out with what's called a blue book, and he'll do a press conference, and it talks about all the things that if he got to write the budget himself, this is how it would look. And then as a courtesy to the governor, that bill is introduced exactly as the governor wants it in the House, and that's their starting point. So that's introduced as the operating budget in the House. It's thousands of pages, and it always starts in the House. That's pretty much the only bill that has to start in one chamber. So then the bill will get lots of hearings in the House. We have already gone through this process this year in subcommittees, finance subcommittees that are small committees separated out by section. And those committees will hear testimony from Ohioans, and they will bring in experts in the field to talk about different pieces of the budget. And all of these hearings are happening at the same time. So they will have hearings all over the State House on the same day on different pieces of the budget in these subcommittees. And they will, as the subcommittees, give reports to the larger Finance Committee. And then the budget, again, it's still in the House, will go through two major rewrites. So once the subcommittees give their reports to the Finance Committee, they will create a substitute bill, which is really a whole new version of the bill. It's where they take out everything the governor wanted and they replace it with whatever they want. And it changes the entire bill. It is an entirely new piece of legislation. And then it will go through a new committee process, largely in Finance Committee, where they do hearings again. Ohioans can come in and testify again. And then they will have a second version of the bill that comes out called an omnibus amendment. And that is what they'll send to the Senate. This process can be very frustrating for people who are following the State House, because there are public records exceptions that basically make it so we can't tell where different amendments and changes to the budget come from. We can't tell which legislators introduced them or suggested them. So that can be very frustrating, because at this point, it literally to us just looks like a whole new bill comes out of nowhere. And it makes it so that I, as someone who's trying to help activists understand what's going on with the state, don't really even focus on the budget until right about this point in the process when it goes over to the next chamber, because otherwise it's just confusing how many times it fully changes to another bill. So this is where we are right now. We just last week, all of the House process was completed, and the House passed their version of the budget over to the Senate. It's $95 billion. You saw in there's a lot of compromises. Democrats and Republicans are pleased with a lot of the money that's in there. Obviously, there are vast differences on where the taxation, where the funding should come from, who should have the most of the tax burden. But a lot of the programs, there is a good compromise between the House and the Senate, or the House Democrats and the House Republicans. And that is because of that dynamic with Jason Stevens, who was not supposed to be Speaker of the House. He knows that his caucus is made up of Democrats and Republicans, and so there had to be some compromises. That's also why the current version of the House budget does not include any of those culture war pieces that we normally see. There's no, to my knowledge, it's thousands of pages, you never know. There are no abortion bans or LGBTQ type issues, what you think of as social issues in there right now. The concern is that they will be added in the Senate. So now we're going to be starting this new process in the Senate, and it's the same process, although Matt Huffman, Senate President Matt Huffman, does not like subcommittees. So he has been using regular committees as the subcommittees, which has actually been nice for folks in the advocacy space, because, for example, the Education Committee right now has stopped hearing all of their bills that everyone has been battling over, and are now going to start hearing pieces of the budget for a little bit. So it gives everybody a breather. But the same process will happen, where they have lots of public testimony hearings. You all, if you work in a field that requires funding, or you think there should be funding going to something else in your field, you can go in and testify. There will be 2 different versions. Again, there will be a substitute bill that comes out of those initial hearings, and then they'll have more hearings and amendments and get an omnibus amendment. So you at any point could go in and testify as an Ohioan if you'd like, and I will show you in a second how to do that. So the interesting thing about the budget is that there is another step. So the Senate will send the bill back to the House once they pass it and make all their changes. The House can only vote yes or no, up or down. They can't make any changes of their own. And because the Senate has made so many changes, the House literally always votes no. They say, we do not accept the Senate version of the budget. And so then we have to go to a process that most bills do not go through in Ohio. Conference committee. So conference committee it's literally a few people in a room fighting. It is fascinating. They will bring in 6 people, so more members of the majority party, obviously, but 6 people or so, and no public testimony is allowed, and they can literally throw the whole bill out and rewrite it if they feel like it. They won't do that because that's a lot of work, but they can add anything they want. So there's always a concern that a lobbyist has been in somebody's ear, those 6 members, and can add something in that none of us had even heard of before at this point in the process. But basically, it's members from the House and the Senate, few people elected to represent their whole chamber, who get together to work out their differences between the House and Senate versions of the budget. And this is a part where public pressure is going to be very important, because we can't go in and testify, but we will know who these people are at this point. We can call them, we can go to their offices, we can email them, and we can tweet at them and make sure everybody knows that if they vote to do X thing in the budget, that we will hold them personally accountable. So then, once the conference committee reaches their final version of the budget, it is sent to the House and Senate. They can only vote yes or no. At this point, they cannot make any changes. They always vote yes. So whatever comes out of conference committee becomes the bill they send to the governor. And then we have another part of the process, which is actually activists that have a real power here as well. The governor, because there's money connected to this bill, can line item veto. So he can go through the bill that's thousands of pages and cut out individual pieces. which is crucial because there might be parts that you support that you want to stay in, but parts that you really oppose that you need him to veto. And the governor always vetoes some things. So this creates a couple of extra days for Ohioans to call and make their voices heard and demand line item vetoes of certain pieces of the budget. So this entire process has to be done by midnight on June 30th, and they will often finish it at like 11:57 on June 30th. So it is a late night for the legislators and their staff heading into that budget deadline, where the next fiscal year 2024, starts on July 1st. There have been a couple times where they didn't make it, but you don't really feel it personally at home. It's just there's a couple days where technically we don't have any money. So I'm going to talk you through a couple resources and action items for ways that you can be part of this process. The number one thing you can do is sign up for committee and subcommittee notice lists, although we're now at the point where we're already in the Senate. So those are the notice lists you want to be signing up for. And this can actually also be very helpful for any issue you care about as an Ohioan. You call the committee chairs and or email them and ask to be placed on their committee notice list. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Committee notice lists are anytime a hearing is going to be held in that committee, they will send you an email. They will tell you which bills or which parts of the budget are going to be heard and when and where. And they will tell you what type of testimony they're accepting, opponent testimony or proponent, which is supporter. So it really gives you a leg up on everybody else in the state because you'll know first when these bills or pieces of the budget are going to be heard. So I will send you all this. So if I have your email address, I will send you legislature.ohio.gov and a walkthrough for how you sign up for the committee notice lists. All the committees are listed on the legislature website, and you can go through and you can click. I'm going to click Senate committees because that's where the budget is. And you can see they're broken down by category. So if you care deeply about education, I would recommend signing up for those committee notice lists. I'm going to click on the Senate Education Committee. It takes you to a page with all of their faces. The chair is always listed first. The chair is so powerful. They have the ability to move bills and kill bills. They're the ones that you will call, submit your testimony to if you're going to testify. They're the ones that you'll call and demand pieces of the budget be added or removed. So that chair is always listed first. They're also the person that you will contact to ask to be added to that notice list. So if you care about education in the Senate or the Senate education piece of the budget, then that would be Senator Brenner's office could add you to that list. And I have mentioned a few times, you are able to come in and testify. A lot of Ohioans don't know they have this ability. So we end up with the same 10 lobbyists over and over again. We need you. We need you to come in. And it really does have an impact because it is not a common occurrence to get a large group of Ohioans testifying. So we love for you to come in person. We make that hard. We tend to have hearings at 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesdays. And I can't tell you how long they're going to go. I can only tell you when they're going to start. And so you have to be able to give a significant amount of your day. So if you can do that, it's very great. It's important because they can ask you questions and the press will be there and you can be on TV and that kind of thing. But if you can't, written testimony is great too. It's officially a part of the record. It's put online. It's shareable. They will have it in front of them on their iPads in committee. So it's valuable and important to submit testimony written if you can't do it in person. And the process is incredibly simple. It is literally just this one slide. Submitting testimony is 3 steps. You write your testimony, you fill out a witness slip, which I will send you. I have a generic one that you can fill out, and then you email it to the chair. And that is it. That's the whole process. So if you're submitting written-only testimony, we should really all be doing it all the time because it's that simple. But if you're coming in to testify, the only other process is that you show up. They have recently started requiring that testimony come in 24 hours in advance. So try to follow that rule. But if you ever find out about a hearing less than 24 hours in advance, sometimes the chair will be lenient and give you an opportunity to still submit. And this is just one of many, many examples of how when people actually show up, the press pays attention because it is not common. We get entire articles, entire news stories, literally just about citizens from Ohio appearing at the State House to testify. And some tips about good testimony, conveniently, the shorter the better. So again, it makes it very simple to write it because if there's a lot of you, they will often limit testimony to a few minutes per person. So you want your testimony to already be short. And you also want to think of your audience. So there's a supermajority of Republicans at the State House. There's going to be a supermajority of Republicans on each committee. So I always tell people to think of the Thanksgiving dinner table and your most conservative relative, and you're having a debate about something, and how would you try and persuade that person? Obviously, you can write whatever you want, but that's who will be listening. And this is the template. I will send this to you. It's very simple, just lays out the format so that you can feel confident that your testimony is laid out exactly like the professionals are doing it. The lobbyists and you will be writing their testimony the exact same way. And if you cannot come to committee, which is fair, you can also watch it online. We have ohiochannel.org. All the committees and all the sessions are broadcast and recorded, so you can watch them later and they're shareable. This is new. This is actually a significant win for government transparency for the Democrats who've been fighting for this for literally decades, and were successful in compromising with the Republicans a couple years back. And now we are able to watch all of the committees. When I worked there in 2015 through 2017, we were only allowed to record Finance Committee and nothing else. So that has been a significant change, even in strategy for activists in the last couple of years. This is what it looks like. Many of you probably watched Governor DeWine's COVID press conferences on ohiochannel.org. So all the committees are there, they're archived, and you can go back and watch them later. We also have several really strong advocacy organizations that do great budget work. They are nonpartisan organizations. Sometimes they focus on specific issues, like Groundwork Ohio is very focused on children's issues. And they will send out action alerts. They will send you phone numbers to call, emails that you can do to help you narrow down all of the chaos in the budget to individual pieces that they hope that you focus on. So I will send you a list of these organizations as well. You can follow their email lists or follow them on social media, and they'll just help you with managing how much there is in the budget. A couple more resources I'll show you and then take questions. So this is budget.ohio.gov. This piece of the budget has already passed, but if you want to see what Governor DeWine's dream version of the budget looked like, it's all there. You can see what he proposed and then see what the Senate and the House changed from what Governor DeWine wanted. This is one of my favorite websites. The Legislative Service Commission, they are so underrated. They're hired by the state, they're nonpartisan, they're mostly lawyers. They're the ones who write Ohio's bills. They are just incredible, but they also put out just massive amounts of resources for the budget process. So lsc.ohio.gov, which I will send you, and I'm gonna click on the Budget Central tab and show you some of those amazing resources. So we are currently in the 135th General Assembly. It'll be right up front. Main operating budget is the one we're talking about. And they put out documentation for literally the last 100 years of, if you want to see what Ohio spent money on, but they put out documents for every agency where every funding line item is going and where we are in the process. So the comparison document, you'll hear staff, if you talk to a staffer on the phone, they'll call it the comp doc. It is everyone's favorite document at the legislature. It is, I will show you a picture of it. So it will show you where every single line of this 3,000 plus page bill goes through the entire process. So you can see that, and I highlighted this to show you that no matter which issues you're personally passionate about, there's money connected to them in the budget. Moms Demand Action, who they work on gun reform issues, they often try to get this line item removed from the budget. So even if you are not a big fan of funding, but you care about guns, there's still a reason to watch the budget. But so this is the comparison document, the comp doc. It shows you what it looks like once the process is completed. You can see that Governor DeWine put in $200,000 for this line item for training for guns in schools. And then you can see that the House kept that same piece of funding at the exact same amount that the governor wanted. And then you can see that the Senate kept it as well. And then you can see that it became law. And you can follow every single line all the way through, which is wonderful. So you'll get activists or advocates who work in this space who have just particular line items that they will follow all the way through obsessively. I actually was out with a friend the other night, and the omnibus budget came out, and he was like, I have to go home, the comp doc has changed. So, so that is where staffers will be in this document all day long. Okay, so you don't actually have to take out your phone. This is just ways if you want to follow how things work at the State House. We've got lots of calls to action that we'll put out. We're on social media. I'm on TikTok now. I don't love TikTok, but it's good. And we also have a list of Ohio reporters who focus on the State House. So if you're still on Twitter, you can go and just read through that list, and reporters will post their articles each day. And it's a great way to follow what's happening at the State House without all of the rest of the noise. So I will send this to you as well in that resources email. And then again, if you're interested, I'd love help paying my rent. That's where we are. So I will send you that link in the email as well. And okay, that was a ton of information. I'm now going to take questions, but I first just want you to remember how much power you have at the state level, because so few people do anything at the state level that it does not take very many of you to make a huge difference. So pick the thing that we just talked about that made you the most passionate and call about it during the budget process. And yeah, does anyone have any questions?